So shamanism, from the archaeological and other evidence that we've seen, appears to be, at least in the European continent, at least 30,000 years old. There's good evidence from the caves in France, like Chauveau Cave, and other caves that indicate there's a shamanic consciousness there. On other continents, it may be older. For example, Australia, among the Aboriginals, and in Africa, there's some evidence from just sites, archaeological sites, that have some shamanic indicators. And so it has been very, very well described by many experts as the world's oldest spiritual practice. But shamanism, so it's found on every inhabited continent, and and was used by the people primarily as a healing methodology, and it was also used as a divinatory practice. In other words, to contact these spirits and ask for help in seeking food sources and other things that were very important to the survival of the peoples. So it has those two major elements, I think, to it. Some people confuse shamanism with a religion. It's actually not a religion. It is because it's not a system of faith among shamans. Shamanic people tend to be of animistic. They have, in other words, they believe that there are spirits. The shamans don't believe they're spirits. They know they're spirits because they interact with them and work with them all of the time. So, but animism, the idea that there are spirits that you need to placate and or interact with, that is more that is or can be a kind of spiritual practice and religion. But among shamans, it's a very pragmatic practice that has to do with the survival of the people. Michael Harner was an anthropologist. That was his training, but he also had quite a bit of background in archaeology and ethnography. And what he had a very profound shamanic experience, transformative experience among the people, the Konibo people and the Shuar people in Amazonia, northwest Amazonia. And through that experience, which he wrote about in his classic book, The Way of the Shaman, he discovered, his major discovery was that there was another reality. Not so much, that was the thing that opened him up. And of course, his experience was through an ayahuasca kind of experience, which is what the people he worked with used at that time. And but after that experience, he came back to the United States. And has written papers and all of that kind of thing too. But he came back to the United States, and he started looking around for doing a lot of research and actually going to visit other shamanic peoples. And his mindset was that it had to be through an ayahuasca kind of experience, that, or some sort of people call them entheogens now, but plant medicines, psychotropics, whatever your term is. But he was thinking, that was his mindset, that it had to be that experience. And what he discovered in going around to all these different shamanic peoples is that more than 90% of the world's shamanic peoples actually use rhythmic percussion sound, drums, rattles, that these aren't just for show, that these are the things that actually change the shaman's consciousness so that the shaman can at will and with discipline access these sources of reality. And so in his various studies, he distilled from the cultural overlay, because every culture, of course, has its approach to this powerful, this is a very powerful system. So people have their own deities, they have their own spirits they work with. Obviously, they're working with a culture. But what he distilled out from his own knowledge and his anthropological studies too, is that there were very common fundamental principles that underlay all of these shamanic practices that people had, and that these methods, not cultural things, but these methods could be taught and returned to particularly Westerners, now Easterners too, people who had lost their shamanic traditions centuries ago in Europe, for example, during the Inquisition and other things like that. And so his primary focus was that this was a very powerful system of being able to access a profound source of help, spirits, and bring that help back to a troubled world. We have many, many problems we need to solve, and we don't have to solve them alone. So that's the general background there. The core principles of shamanism, I'll just mention a few, and one of the core principles of shamanism is a kind of cosmography of the world. And there are actually three worlds. There's an upper world, a lower world, and a middle world. And the important thing about those worlds is that the upper world and the lower world are entirely in what has been called non-ordinary reality. That's a term that Carlos Castaneda used. It's useful, meaning that it's a non-consensual reality. It's a different reality. It has different principles that operate in those realities. And the middle world is actually dual. I mean, that's a common term that's used now, but it has an ordinary reality aspect, which is a consensual reality. So we can sit here and we can we can measure how much light is. We could measure each other's weight. We could, if we wanted to, which we don't, but we could do all of those kinds of things, and we would come out with an agreement on that kind of thing. But it also has a non-ordinary reality aspect, which is more of a spiritual reality. And by spiritual, I mean non-physical. So in that reality, it's inhabited by various, we call them spirits, beings. And there are other things that happen in that non-ordinary reality of the middle world, which is why we have from a shamanic perspective, why there is spiritual illness and other things. But the difference with the upper world and the lower world is that they're entirely in non-ordinary reality. And so far as we have been able to discover, and through hundreds of thousands now of students journeying and visiting these places, this is inhabited by fully evolved, compassionate beings. Again, we call them spirits. And so they have power and wisdom that is not readily available here unless you know how to access that other reality. And so the methods that are taught in shamanism, that's what we teach. We teach a method. How do you access these other realities and learn to communicate and relate to very specific beings, spirits. We call them either teachers or power animals. I mean, that's the general term. And how do you interact with them, and then how do you bring that wisdom here? And sometimes bring that power here for healing, for problem solving. Some people use it more in their own lives for transformation, although shamanism actually is not necessarily a system. It's not a system of enlightenment. But what I found is transformation is the outcome of doing it. You use it in service for others and you are transformed. So there are several other principles of shamanism I could tell you about, but the fundamental, the first of all is the idea of the worlds. And that's why we teach people how to contact particularly the spirits of the upper and the lower world. And we teach them what to be aware of in terms of the middle world, non-ordinary reality, because the spirits there are not fully evolved and they can be troublesome. Just like there are good people and bad people, that some of the spirits are not, that some of them are not very evolved and they have agendas, and the upper and lower world spirits don't. So anyway, we teach people how to contact those spirits, but then when we teach shamanic healing, that has to do with how do you work with things in the middle world. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but I wanted to say, so there are the worlds, and then one really fundamental principle of shamanism is that everything is one and is alive and has spirit. And everything, even human-made things, because everything is. And so there's sometimes in our advanced workshops, we actually do a lot of work with these different aspects of reality where we do a kind of merging with them. We merge to actually sense, to become that, to become it, and to feel what it's like. For example, one time I did a very profound journey to the spirit of my computer. And it was one of those things where it was very amusing at one level because I ended up going out through the internet. This was in the earlier days of the internet. And I had an experience of the oneness of all things through that simple, what seemed to be simple process of trying to understand that. But I think that's a principle of shamanism that shamans don't believe, again, that they end up doing a lot of practices where they become. You know, we've all heard of a lot of different cultural viewpoints of this, but of people who become one with an eagle, or become one with whatever the animal is, or they become one with a tree, or whatever. So in shamanic work, what I've found is that the foundation that I worked with before the Foundation for Shamanic Studies was devoted to the idea of all is one. And we did a lot of scientific study of it. But the idea is that so we offered education in this former foundation. We offered educational programs about oneness and about unity, and there's certainly a lot of scientific evidence that you can use. But the beautiful thing about shamanism is that it was all that in shamanism you can have the experience of the oneness of all things. You can know it deeply in your being, along with the scientific evidence, which is also important. Shamanism is a very holistic practice. So, you know, wherever you can find truth, whatever ways that you find truth is good. Shamanism is not the only way. It's also a holistic practice in terms of shamanic healing. So, meaning that there are some things that medical practices do very well, and sometimes we need that. And so you encourage people to do that. Other times, I'm a little distracted here. That's all right. I'll just make sure it's gone. So, so shamans and the rest and other kinds of healers work very well together. You know, we practice those kinds of holistic practices together. So there's the oneness of all things. There's the three worlds, the idea of the three worlds, and then the understanding that shamanism is an independent spirituality. Our focus is teaching people to go directly to the source of information and wisdom. So there is no intermediary. And that's why I said it's not a system of faith. But the idea of shamanic practice is that through learning these fairly simple methodologies, although you have to practice them, you can access these very powerful and wise spirits or beings and learn how to bring back that wisdom here to help others. And then, of course, at first, I think all of us, when we start journeying, we spend a lot of time communicating with these various spirits in these realities to learn for ourselves, to say, okay, what am I doing here, you know, and to get personal help and advice. And I think that one of the major principles of shamanism is that you can, once you connect with this dimension, you yourself become a more compassionate person, because these are very fully evolved, compassionate beings. You become a more compassionate person, or you strive to become a more compassionate person. And also you realize, Michael used to say that we are not alone. In fact, he wrote an article at one point talking about we are not alone. But in my personal experiences, what I've discovered, and what I've discovered through a lot of students who I've worked with, is that we discover that I am not alone, that there is help available to me, very wise, compassionate help. No matter how bad things get, you do not have to be alone in it, you know, and you can rely. And these spirits are, like I said, they're fully compassionate, but they also do not have an agenda. Their agenda, if there is any agenda, is to alleviate pain and suffering here. And so you can rely on them and trust them and what they say and what they do. So I think that that's one of the major transformative possibilities that shamanism offers. Well, in working with the Harners over many years, and also teaching students, when you follow particular students, and in my own life, of course, you follow people through this process, you see an ever deepening sense of compassion. There is also, that I think is one of the main things that it can do for people. You also, though, notice that practicing this and being whole in your soul, and having this connection, and this gives you a kind of what we call spiritual power. You know, power is a difficult term sometimes for some people, because we've all experienced abuse of power. But shamanism, when you are working with these compassionate spirits, you start to understand a little bit more, not only about how the world actually works, but you start to have a much clearer sense of your own work in the world, and what you want to do, and how you want to help, and what changes you want to make. And even with very, very large problems, you can get wisdom to help you solve those problems. You also can very, very directly go to the spirits and try to examine your own blocks in your own life. What is keeping you from being fully who you came here to be, fully yourself, fully evolved. And you can work on those with the help of the spirits. I've seen transformation in people doing that kind of work for themselves. But even more profound is when people are drawn to do some kind of shamanic healing for others, because it's in being service to others that amazing changes can take place. And so I would say that although I've seen all kinds of changes, or deep changes, profound changes in students taking the work, a lot of those changes have come from learning the method and then using it in the world, not only for yourself to transform, but also to offer healing to others, to solve problems, to maintain your own personal power so that you can be very effective in the world. It has a lot to do with being very, very effective. You gain this kind of spiritual power, meaning your soul is fully present in your body, and so what you do has more effect. It has a larger effect, and so there are so many ways that plays out. And then, of course, the people who are the recipients of these healings, have their lives changed in big ways, because they no longer are suffering from whatever the issue that is that they have. And then more and more of us now, since there are more of us, are actually using shamanic work to try to help in world situations. And I mean to try to come up with pragmatic, practical solutions. That's what we call the divinatory component, asking the spirits for, okay, what's some way I can help in this situation, and then playing it out and seeing how it works. So it's not about what we might call, it's not about using shamanism in a ceremonial way or asking the spirits to come do it. We actually find ways of enacting it as humans and evolving at the same time. So I think that's one of the major things I see in terms of working into the future for shamanic work. From a shamanic perspective, soul retrieval has to do with returning a person's personal power to them. From a shamanic perspective, we humans also have a spirit, a personal spirit, which we have called the soul, along with all of the other things that are living and not living that have spirit and soul at some level. But from a shamanic perspective, through just living life sometimes in this world, you can be knocked around by life a bit. You can undergo certain kinds of traumas. We all know that this is a difficult reality. And in doing that, part of your essence or your vital life force can dissipate. If your soul is fully gone from your body, then you die. Your soul passes somewhere else, which shamanism also does talk about sometimes. Your soul goes someplace else, and when your body is gone, you no longer have that anchor in this reality. So, but you can walk around quite diminished, which is a source of, it can be a source of vulnerability to illnesses and difficult, and it also makes your life very difficult. Things that might have been easy for you to be before suddenly become very difficult. Challenging situations may cause you to get even worse, you know. So in shamanism, with the shaman can, through a methodology that we teach in our courses, look for and find this lost essence of your soul and return it to your body. There's a very specific practice for doing that. And once that soul essence is restored to you, then you have what you might call, I like to think of it somehow as a spiritual immune system, so that life still is going to throw challenges at you, because that's the nature of this reality, but you have a kind of resilience to them. You have the ability to say, okay, even really, really difficult things become things that you can use, or not that you can use, but things that you can address in some fashion, because you have this spiritual immune system. So soul retrieval is a very important spiritual practice, because it allows you to be fully present here, but also in your full power. And it doesn't make your problems go away, but it makes them solvable. It makes them, and the people I know who've done this who have really gotten to the point where their soul is pretty solid in their bodies. And when you do this work, the spirits work with you a lot, and so sometimes they'll even spontaneously return soul, we call them soul portions, to you. There's a simple example that I sort of like to use, and I'm not too sure how apt it is, but it seems to speak to people, and that is, if you think of yourself as coming into this world as like a 100-watt light bulb, you're very bright and shiny and all of this, and through working with life, you get knocked around till maybe you're walking around as 20 watts. So a trained shaman can bring back that find and bring back that lost essence to you and return it to you, so that then you are then fully able then to work through life. So it's an amazing practice in many ways. In many ways it's quite simple. The methodology is simple, but as with all shamanic practice, the methodologies tend to be simple, but what makes the difference is that a shaman with experience and who has very, very strong relationships with the helping spirits, because the helping spirits, these advanced spirits of the upper and the lower worlds, they are the ones who do the work. They are the ones who do the work, but we're very important to the process. We work in partnership with them because they have a limited ability to pass into this reality unless one of us invites them and knows how to bring that power here. Well, it's very interesting. Sometimes memories do come back with soul portions. And we've also learned a lot of times, too, that a lot of, this may be slightly off the subject, but a lot of what people might call past life experiences might be influencing spirits in the middle world who've had those experiences. Because almost all of those kinds of things end in some sort of a tragedy. They end violently. There's a violent end, not just a, almost all of those do.
So the spirits that are stuck in
They might be influencing you. They influence people. And so we don't go a lot into those kinds of things until we get to our advanced programs, because we want people to be fully connected with helping spirits and know what they're doing and all of that. But it is a very powerful experience, though, to have part of your soul come back. And it can be, sometimes it almost seems subtle. I mean, I remember at one point when I got into shamanism, I also started writing songs. Songs started coming to me, spiritual songs. It was part of this amazing transforming process that I went through. But I had a soul retrieval by the same friend who recommended me to Michael's work. And I had been working, because the songs were coming to me, I had been working to try to improve my voice and all of these kinds of things I was doing to do it. And I was still feeling stuck, like I wasn't making much progress. Well, she did the soul retrieval for me. I didn't ask for anything specific other than to be whole. And that night I was singing one of my songs, and I realized that my voice had totally shifted. It had shifted into the block where I was singing from here was gone, and now I was singing more with the full body. And so that to me was, again, another a confirmation that something change had occurred. So that might seem subtle, but at the time it was an amazing thing to me, because I had been working for, it seemed like months, to try to get to that point, and then it had changed like that, because of the soul retrieval. So it's a very powerful thing. What we call the MONAR project, that's the mapping of non-ordinary reality, was begun by Michael and Sandra back, I believe, in the 70s. And the reason that the idea of mapping non-ordinary reality is really what it sounds like. We were looking at the upper or the lower worlds, and we were trying to say, what are the commonalities here? Are there any commonalities? When people go there, is there any way to actually create a kind of unified kind of map where people could see, yes, I'm learning this, I went here and I saw this, and it was on this level or whatever. So we were looking for those kinds of things from people's journeys. And so Michael, being also an ethnographer person, he was very interested. We don't judge people's journeys or try to analyze them or anything like that, because it's a non-consensual reality. You see what you see, what's perfect for you. But what we were trying to figure out is there something, it was, I would call it almost a scientific kind of project to see that. And ideally, what we wanted to do is collect these very early journeys from people where there was nothing that they were told they should expect to see, and find out, do they see things in common? Where do they see them? Is it possible to create some kind of a map? And so we have collected we stopped collecting them some years ago, partly because people were sharing a lot of their journeys, and so there weren't any more what you might call naive subjects, So you couldn't use that to prove the point we were trying to prove. But we ended up with about almost 5,000 different journeys, the earliest journeys of Westerners, we call them again. And what we had hoped to be able to do with these is, Michael, I know, really wanted to, at one point, to see if he could find some non-Westernized indigenous people and see if there were commonalities there. And that was or is quite a project, because not only finding some who haven't been too Westernized, but also you have to have a certain amount of anthropological knowledge to be able to analyze these. So, for example, a modern person might journey and say, well, I found a library. An indigenous person might go to a place where there is a wise old man or a wise woman, a source of knowledge. So very similar, but you have to have some sense of being able to also understand that in the cultural implications too. So it was a very complex project, but the beautiful thing about it is that all of these early journeys were preserved, and much of it was summarized. Michael did his major summary of it in his book, Cave and Cosmos, where he took some of these early journeys, particularly he tried to find the earliest ones, and then he looked through the literature, because the difficult thing about shamanic work is that it's very hard. It's an oral tradition, not a written tradition. So it's very hard to find early anthropologists who wrote down. The ethnographers are the best, the ones who just listen to the stories and write them down word for word. But he was able to find a few, and there was just some amazing similarities in what people were seeing and reporting in their journeys, these modern contemporary people, and some of the indigenous people from times past. And so we still have all of those journeys preserved. And at some point, we hope to be able to make those available to people for research, researchers who may then continue that work in discovery. We're in a reality where you're thinking up or down. One of the most important principles that I think that the reason Michael went into this is that he was just, from his early experiences, he was just awed by the fact that there was another reality. There was that we think this is real, and now and then we have experiences that we can't explain, etc. And that there was another reality that was totally different from this reality, that had its own integrity, own rules, own guidelines, and things like that. And that if you could access that reality, you could make this reality better. So he was very struck by that. And so in terms of evolving, of us, or using, and I can only speak to shamanic methods really, to transform, then you do need to have knowledge that people, if you cannot go through this reality, you can go through this reality naively open, but you will invite to yourself difficulties. It's like you're swimming in an ocean where there are a lot of things that can come your way without any kind of knowledge or protection. And so in studying shamanic methods, you learn how to access these sources of protection. That's why when we first start with our work, when we're teaching it, we connect people with what we've talked about as the up or the down, because those spirits are fully compassionate. And once you have this connection with them, it's sort of like having a rechargeable battery. You can plug into that, and you have then this source of power and wisdom that allows you to have protection in this, as you move through this environment, which has this dual nature. And you are then able to not only have protection, but you are able to more successfully expand. One of the amazing principles to me about shamanism is that, and the way we teach it too, if you have an experience with plant medicines, you might be cracked open, and be able to see that. But Michael, his opinion about that, having done both, is that, and I think this is true for me too, is that once you are open, then you also need a methodology and a discipline to be able to work this. It's not some people I think, well, I take some sort of a drug, a plant. This is true in medicine too, and then suddenly all my problems are through or finished. That is only the beginning, and so then you need to find some way that's workable for you to be able to do this. And in my case, for example, shamanism was a wonderful way of being able to have a discipline, to be able to use it to work with others, and then and then you get to the point where you feel I'm a totally different person than I was when I started. Particularly, I think I think I was always a little bit sensitive to the world. The world needs help, and I wanted to help, but I didn't really know how to do that, or effectively, in some senses, how do I transform myself, and what would that transform self look like? How would I function? And so one of the beautiful things I really like about shamanism is that I've started to look at my helping spirits as my role models. So they're fully evolved, they're compassionate, they don't have agendas, they're not going to be, they're kind, they'll poke you when you need it, but it's not like they're all lovey-dovey and all that kind of stuff. This is not an airy-fairy kind of thing. It's very solid, very grounded work. But most shamans I know are extremely pragmatic people. But you have to be fully grounded here in order to let yourself loose to travel in those realms. So I think it's a beautiful work to be involved in, and you have so many wonderful experiences, those touching, loving experiences in small, but large ways and small ways. I saved the life of a squirrel one time, going through a lot, and I learned a lot I went through a whole process with it. It's a long story. And then a few days after that, I was at a workshop, a shamanic workshop, in a kind of a wild place. And I was walking down the path, and I thought, what's that? And I heard like footsteps, and I looked back, and there was a squirrel following me. And it came up, and it patted me on the foot. It was another squirrel. But I personally think, okay, somehow these are the mysterious little things, that happen. That squirrel knew that I was a friend to squirrels. It wasn't looking for food. It just patted me on the foot, and then it went away. And I thought, this is strange, But you have enough of those kinds of experiences, and you realize that how interconnected, that everything is one, and that there is a spiritual dimension that is working hard, just as we're working hard, to connect with us and wants us to succeed. That's how I think of the spirits. So it's I'm always touched by the ways, large and small, that this dimension works with us.